Hey guys, I'm Rich from NeoWin. Today we are reviewing the Microsoft Lumia 550. Okay, so this is Microsoft's latest budget offering. Okay, so last October they had their devices event and they announced the Lumia 950, 950 XL, and you could have blinked and missed it, but they announced this thing too. Now, Microsoft said last year that they are going to release 6 phones a year. They said 2 budget devices, 2 flagship devices, and 2 business devices. Now, obviously, this is one of the budget devices. Okay, it's the 500 line. They also introduced the 650 in February. Some people believe that's the next budget device, although they said it was a business phone despite not supporting Continuum. So that kind of remains to be seen. Now, typical things about this phone, we have a 4.7-inch 720p IPS LCD, 5-megapixel rear camera with autofocus and a single LED flash, and a 2-megapixel front camera. The internals are a quad-core 1.1 gigahertz Snapdragon 210, 1 gigabyte of RAM, and it supports LTE, and it also has an Adreno 304 GPU. So the first thing I want to talk about is the design. All right, now that's one of the number one reasons that a lot of people buy a phone. Maybe not you, but a lot of people do buy a phone for a design. You want a phone that looks good. You want something that you're going to take out of your pocket and people are going to go, ooh, what's that? That looks nice. That's something you get from like a Lumia 930. It's a beautiful phone. And then you go, that's my Windows phone. Now, you don't really get that from this phone. It's your basic plastic mid to lower end design that you get from Lumia's. We have the same design from the 635 here, although the 635 came in more colors. All right. The 550 comes in white and black, although if you buy it from a Microsoft store in the United States, it only comes in black. As Henry Ford would say, any color you want as long as it's black. Okay, and the same story goes for the Lumia 640 here, which, by the way, looks exactly the same with the exception of the way the branding is. All right, the design is the same. It's generally exactly the same. And I can tell you that I've had this phone for a few weeks, and at least a half dozen times I've gotten it mixed up with the 640. And the 550 is a little bit smaller, but it's very easy to get these two phones mixed up, and it happens. And the one way that you can do it, that you can tell the difference, is by looking at the back. Okay, so the design is nothing impressive, and unfortunately, we have to look at the 650 when we talk about the design, because the 650 is beautiful. It costs $60 more, and they just released it in February, if it wasn't for the 650, the 550 would be able to stand on its own a lot better. But the 650 kind of sets that bar for a budget phone a lot higher than the 550 can reach. Okay, so again, standard, boring, low-end Lumia design. Now, I don't think it's the worst design in the world, but there's nothing special about it like there is with the 650. Now, onto the display, the other part of the design. The display is actually surprisingly good. Okay, we have a 720p 4.7-inch IPS LCD. Now, we have a 720p IPS LCD in the Lumia 640 here, but it's a little bigger, 5 inches. Now, at 4.7 inches, 720p, that gives you about 312 ppi, which is pretty nice. At 5 inches, it's about 294 ppi, and it's something that you can actually tell the difference with because, all right, I know a lot of people are going to hate me for saying this because, this is how I always judge pixel density. Apple's definition of retina on a phone is 326 ppi. And personally, I think they're right. And what that means is that if you have 20/20 vision, you're looking at the phone from an average distance. That means you're not squinting and holding it up to your eye. If you're at an average distance, your 20/20 vision, you can't see any pixelation, and you can't tell the difference between 326 ppi and anything more than that. Of course, anything lower than that, you will start to see it. And this is why I tend to agree, because on a phone like this, I can kind of see pixelation. I do kind of notice it as I use it. Whereas I don't on Apple's iPhone 6 or 6S, and then anything more than that, I don't. So you can tell the difference between the pixelation of these two phones. It's a little more on here, and it's a little more on the 650 as well, which is 720p at 5 inches, although it's an AMOLED, so I have to give the better display to the 650. It's absolutely beautiful. Okay, now notice, people. I know people are going to ask me this because people always do. I have 4 columns here. You can do the same on the Lumia 550 here. It's my experience that you can get 4 columns on any Lumia that has QHD, lowercase q, 540 by 960 display or better. Can't do it on the 480p phones. And what you got to do is you got to go into settings and go to system, display, and then you have to lower this slider a little bit, and then you're going to press apply, and it's going to tell you to restart the phone. We're not going to restart the phone right now. One other thing to note about the display is that it brings glance to the 550 series. All right, so that's huge. The 640, I always thought the 640 brought glance to the 600 series, and because they made such a big deal about it when they made it, and that wasn't true. It was actually in the 620 and then not in the 635. Okay, so I guess you can't put a photo in the lock screen, in the glance screen. I wasn't able to do it on the 650 either. If anybody else has different experiences, let me know. Okay, so the camera. The camera also brings rich capture to the 500 series, which the 640 did bring rich capture to the 600 series. Okay, so it's a 5 megapixel camera. Now, it has everything that you want from your regular Windows phone device camera, but it's f2.4 aperture, quarter-inch sensor, so it's not quite what you got from the 640. In fact, it's also not what you got from the Lumia 540. This is very much a downgrade in camera quality from the Lumia 540. Lumia 540 was 8 megapixels, f2.2 aperture, and a quarter-inch sensor, which is the same as the 640 and the 650. Another thing that I'd note about the camera is the rich capture. It sets itself to auto. That's your only option, is auto or off. All right, and that's something that's new with Windows 10 mobile devices, because if you have a Windows Phone 8.1 device that you upgraded to Windows 10 mobile, right, that will actually let you turn rich capture on and off, right? And that's something a lot of people I know that don't like the fact that they can't explicitly turn rich capture on. Lumia 540 also had a 5 megapixel front camera, where this guy has 2. The 535 even has a 5 megapixel front camera here. So it's very much a downgrade in quality from both of these phones, where, by the way, the 535 was 5 megapixel rear. Now, it is an upgrade. We can look at older Lumias here, and we'll do that in a second. I also want to put it next to other phones. And I have the Billy 4.7 here. This is one of my favorite, it is my favorite budget Windows phone of all time. And the reason for that is because you can see that everything just kind of scales better. And for Windows Phone 8.1, that's a great quality. It really provides a cleaner interface. For Windows 10 mobile, obviously you could change the scaling yourself. Camera isn't particularly great, but I always found this phone to be an extremely pleasant phone to use. Now, this brings us to the internals of the phone. All right. Billy 4.7 here uses Snapdragon 200. This uses Snapdragon 210. What's the difference? And depending on what your priorities are, it's a big difference. Now, they're both 4 cores of ARM Cortex A7, both 28 nanometer processors, but the Snapdragon 200 is clocked at 1.2 gigahertz per core. The Snapdragon 210 is 1.1 gigahertz per core. So, why is this generation's low-end Qualcomm chipset lower powered than last generation's? Well, couple things. One, the 210 has a better GPU. Snapdragon 200 is Adreno 302, 210 is Adreno 304. All right, so you are getting a better GPU from it. 210 supports LTE, it supports 1080p video capture, and playback, although the Lumia 550 does not record in 1080p. It records 720p from both the rear and front cameras. Now, one more thing I would like to mention, though, when we're talking about the internals of this phone, is that Snapdragon 212, otherwise known as Snapdragon 210 version 2, is exactly the same as the 210, except it's 1.3 gigahertz per core instead of 1.1 gigahertz. And when you look at the benchmarks, and you can look at the comparison that I wrote on NeoWin, and it's pretty clear that there's obviously more that they changed between these two chipsets. There must have been something wrong with the 210, because the 210 really is super underpowered for what it should be. The 212 is more of a replacement for the Snapdragon 400, and this generation Snapdragon 410 is really, as far as the architecture goes, a lot more like Snapdragon 600 series than Snapdragon 200, where last generation was more like 200, but with LTE and a better GPU, and exactly what you're getting from Snapdragon 212 here. Right. So finally, I do want to put these next to other phones. I have a couple other phones from the 500 series here. This is the Lumia 530. You notice a lot of apps are grayed out there, and I'll explain why in just a moment. This is the 535, and I also have a 520. Now, the 520 is the most popular Windows phone in the world. All right, we know this. That's because for so long, they were selling this thing for like $30 off contract, which they're doing with the 640 now. Right, but that was when Windows Phone was a lot more exciting. And you got a tremendous amount of value at the time for this phone. Right? Obviously, there's no flash on the rear camera, no front camera. But the rear camera recorded 720p video. It had autofocus, where you take its successor, the 530. It was a fixed focus 5-megapixel camera. It had 4 gigabytes of internal storage instead of 8 that was in the 520. It was just a mess, but it had a quad-core Snapdragon 200, which was a huge upgrade. Now, the Snapdragon 200 in the 535, now this comes with 1 gigabyte of RAM, autofocus in the 5-megapixel rear camera, a flash, a 5-megapixel front camera. It was like they were trying to redeem themselves for the Lumia 530. Okay, so Microsoft's budget line has it's gone back and forth. You look at the specs between the 520, the 530, the 535, the 540, and the 550. It's like one year they're trying to provide a tremendous amount of value for the price. The next year they're just trying for a race to the bottom, and then the next year they're back to providing value. Okay, so this year it seems more of that race to the bottom. It doesn't seem like, and other than rich capture and glance and LTE, which if those are important to you, that's fantastic. As far as camera goes, it's not really an upgrade. I mean, it's a downgrade from last year's model, the 540. As far as display goes, it's about the same as the 540. It has the 720p IPS LCD. Although, as you can see, when I put it side by side with other phones, it is a pretty nice IPS LCD. So here's the one problem. All right, you're going to go into a Microsoft store to buy this phone. If you're in the US, you can't get it from a carrier. You can only get it from a Microsoft store. Right? So what sits next to that phone in the Microsoft store that's also affordable? You have a 650. All right? You also have a Lumia 640. So in that store, you have an unlocked 650 for $199. You have an unlocked 550 for $139. And then you have an AT&T locked Lumia 640 for $29. That is not a contract price. You do not owe them money. You don't have to activate it. It's just a $29 phone, and it's a pretty damn good one. Okay, so what do? You get the 640. Now, what if you're a T-Mobile subscriber? Well, it's pretty easy to get that 640 unlocked. AT&T will unlock just about anything for current or former customers. If you're not a current or former AT&T customer, you probably have a friend that is. Again, assuming you're in the United States. If you're outside the United States, prices are a little bit more realistic, right? And in the United States, they don't even sell an unlocked Lumia 640. Right? Prices are a little bit more realistic, but is the 550 is the 650 worth $60 more than the Lumia 550? Absolutely. All right. I feel like the Lumia 600 series has been about packing tremendous value into a budget phone constantly, consistently. All right. Last year with the Lumia 6, it's like they keep setting the bar. And when I make that Lumia 650 review, I'm going to compare it to the Moto G here, which is also a phenomenal phone. But you look at what the 650 has is a 5 megapixel front camera, an 8 megapixel rear camera, which is the same as the 540's camera. Beautiful Amoled display, beautiful body, Snapdragon 212, where the 210 is a little bit underpowered. And it's been a phenomenal phone. 16 gigabytes of internal storage. You know, they really put a lot of thought and effort into the 650, where the 550 really just feels like just another budget phone. And you know, I try to put it in perspective and say, is the Lumia 650 worth $60 more than the 550? Absolutely it is. You know, and when you have a great budget phone like the 650 selling for $200, you would ask the question, well, is the Lumia 950 XL worth $450 more? And I would say, well, if you don't care about Continuum, probably not. But because it's really hard to justify that one phone is worth 3 times more than any other phone, because again, they're really just phones, and unless you serve specific use cases, you really don't need more than a $200 Moto G or Lumia 650 these days. Okay, so then the question lies, is the Lumia 550 worth the money? And taking everything else off the table, the $29 Lumia 640, the $200 Lumia 650, is it just worth the money? And my answer to that is no. It's $140, and you know, these low-end phones tend to come down in price pretty quickly. That's why you can get a Lumia 640 for $29. But the unlocked phones don't always do that. You know, the Lumia 830, I said that was super overpriced. When it came out, it was $499 unlocked, and it has a Snapdragon 400 inside. Right? This is overpriced in a similar way. I've never really had a Snapdragon 210 powered phone that I've said was fantastic. My experience with it, you know, I'll show you this Antutu score. Now, this is an abandoned beta from 2012. People are gonna complain that I even showed this, but 9456. All right, that's well under any quad-core Lumia that I've ever seen. And this is supposed to be the successor to other phones. All right, I can show you this one too. I really, there's better things that you could get for $140. I personally, anything with Snapdragon 210 and a 720p display, it's just underpowered. You can see the results here. Lumia 650 gets around 30,000 on this test, and it's just not enough. It's not enough. I play some games on my phone. You can't really play games on this. There's a lot of lag in a lot of places. There's nothing really special about this phone. Like I said, like you see from the 650, it's just kind of a regular old Lumia design. Like, it's there because they had to do it. They had to do a 550, so they did it. And they just kind of packed the lowest end processor in there, put an HD display on it, a couple lower end cameras, and they pushed it out the door. You know, and again, I've said this on other reviews, and I know people don't like it when I say it, but a downside to this is that it runs Windows 10 Mobile. Windows 10 Mobile is kind of buggy in a lot of places, and the advantage that you get with another phone is that the Lumia 540 runs Windows Phone 8.1. You can put Windows 10 Mobile on it and get the exact same thing. through the insider preview, through the release preview ring, because we know that there isn't going to be any firmware bundled with the update, so you get the exact same thing through the release preview ring. But if you decide that it's too unstable for you, you can always roll back to Windows Phone 8.1. Anyway, guys, that's it. I'm Rich from NeoWin. Have a great night. Make sure to subscribe. We are the best channel in the universe. Again, have a great night.